I was missing some aspects of the time before. Now, the time before may not have been perfect, but I was missing that. And so I think trying to reach for the emotion as opposed to productivity or creativity is some as a practice is to think about how you feel and what you're feeling, and that will create an opportunity for you to it's like a vessel, and you want to put something in it.
Welcome to Normalize The Conversation by Inspiring My Generation. I'm your host, Francesca Reicherter. Today, I'm joined by Diana Weymar, an artist and activist who uses creativity as a bridge between personal healing and collective storytelling. We're talking about how some of the most powerful art is born from our hardest moments. Diana opens up about her season of depression and loss became the spark for creative renewal, and how reconnecting with creativity can help us rebuild from the inside out. If you've ever felt disconnected from your own creative voice, this conversation will remind you that your story and your art can always begin again. Diana, thank you so much for joining me today. I am very excited for our conversation, but before we begin, I want to check in. How are you really?
How am I really? So I'm sitting, you can't see it, but I have my leg up on a big pink bouncy ball. And about a week ago, I twisted my ankle very badly, and have been nursing it back to health, and was able to see a doctor very quickly. I live in British Columbia, and the same day was able to have x-rays done, and it certainly got me thinking about the accessibility of healthcare here in Canada, and how incredibly lucky I felt to be able to have it looked at so quickly. And I've been trying to slow down and rest it. But of course, the temptation to get up and walk is constant. And I have a whole new appreciation for the ankle as such an important part of the body. So that's how I am.
I'm glad you're doing a little bit better with your ankle.
Yeah.
It's so hard when your body needs rest and needs time to heal. And there's so much temptation to just kind of go back to the way things were before and to keep going so
Mm-hmm.
quickly. And I know for me, that's something I always struggle with. As soon as I start to have a little bit of a point where I'm starting to feel better, I have to over push myself to try to make up for that time where I wasn't doing what I usually do. Oh, I hope you are giving yourself the rest you need, but I know that's so hard for me.
It is hard, and I, tend to look for metaphors and things, and it feels like exactly what you said about the idea of being on a productive path, and not slowing down, and both this contradictory sort of self-care. You're not the first to say to me, like, take care of yourself, take what you need. I hope you're taking care. And I was thinking today, I don't remember the phrase self-care existing when I was younger, but of course it makes so much sense. And then, of course, the other side of it is understanding what, and I'm speaking again metaphorically here, what recovery looks like. So apparently there are contradictory thoughts about a sprain, which is, it used to be, to elevate, rice, rest, ice, compression and elevate. And now there's also a thought that it's good to use it a bit because that starts the blood flowing around the injury. So this can apply to creativity as well, is sort of, when do we feel like we can engage in a creative practice? Do we need sort of a break from it? Do we need to keep going? Or should we just keep circulating around that issue, around the injury? It's just a question, both for my ankle and for creative practice.
Oh, I'm so happy you brought it to that creative practice, because for me, something that's been very, very relevant is I go through these depressive spells where, I don't know why I call it a spell, but these depressive episodes. And when they happen, I often want to stop doing everything. Of course, you lose interest and pleasure in doing things you really enjoy. And for so long, I thought that meant I couldn't create anything. I couldn't do anything because I was losing the interest in doing anything at all. And I've slowly started to learn how much more creative I actually get at that time because I'm trying so hard to find something to hold on to. It sparks more creativity. It sparks more like desperation to want to find that piece of light that's kind of cracking in. And I don't think that's something that's talked about a lot. I know for me, the messaging was always you have to feel good to be able to do good
Mhm.
work.
Yes. And I don't know if we talked about this in our introductory call, but one of the most, one of the tipping points in my creative career came out of a period when I was feeling quite depressed. And the feeling then was I actually had nothing to lose. And so I applied for three things in this very low moment. Um, and all three things happened, and they ended up being the three things that sort of launched me into the next phase of my career. And I never would have thought that that would be the case. There's this concept of putting your best foot forward, and um, your best isn't always your happiest, right? And we could say that there is sort of a culture of sharing your unhappiness now. There's an abundance of sharing, and I think that's very important. I think we still have to remind ourselves that that means that um, we can still do good work. We can still do sincere and honest work in middle of an unhappy period. Let me put it that way. And I had a discussion with a friend yesterday about whether or not notes to Joan Didion's notes that she made during sessions with her therapist should have been published. And after she died, and my friend's sort of attitude was, here's a writer that we admired who was known for her craft, for the precision of her craft. I mean, her, she was she was amazing. And these were notes. These were not her polished, perfect work. But my friend's feeling about it was that it was an opportunity for us to see Joan Didion struggling, not to read her writing about her struggles, but to have a very close, intimate reading of the challenges that she had in terms of her daughter's struggles, her own struggles, depression, alcoholism, all these different things. And isn't it better to know, to have that for other people to feel better, to think that, well, if Joan Didion was going through things and was able to work and be supported by a creative practice, perhaps I can do that too. And also, one feels less alone in their own struggles.
Yeah, it's so powerful to see other people who we admire know that they're also human, right? Because
Hmm.
we only see their best work and the highlight reels online. We often, at least I can speak on my behalf, often I will look at it as, well, when I'm feeling better, I'll be able to do this. But to see someone else is actively going through something and still creating something that's so powerful, that's so admirable, makes such an impact in if they can start where they are, maybe I can too.
Yes, yes, there's so many starting points and there's so many products, so there is a lot to be gained from time seasoned reflection. But and you'll have people who say I wasn't ready to write a book. For example, a recent example is Elizabeth Gilbert, who took years. Her new book is out, and it's taken years for her to write, because sometimes you're too close to the fire. But there are different kinds of products that come out of that, and one might be more processed. So when I applied for those three things in a year of in a deep, you were saying spell, you could say season of depression, whatever it is, this sort of moment, however long that moment is, the point was sort of to um, it was the beginning of feeling some kind of alchemy. I mean, feeling that something could be transformed. So even if those things had not been, I had not been successful in those things, I do believe that that was the beginning. I don't think I would have felt worse. And maybe that's part of it, is that they're, I was not afraid of rejection at all. So when you apply for things and you have no fear of rejection, uh, you're very liberated. And that in and of itself is a very positive feeling and experience. Um, so I think everyone, it's a great opportunity to go into things sort of wholeheartedly without thinking too much about the outcome.
Yeah, it's letting go of that fear of rejection. I think is something that's so hard. But like you said, when you're in those really low moments, it's like, can it really get worse? And being able to lead with, I'll try and see what happens, makes such a difference. So you applied for these grants, you received them. What happened next? How did Tiny Prick Projects like come to life?
Yeah, yeah. So there were three different things. One was a peace building conference through an organization that started at the MIT Media Lab, and their second event was in Cyprus, in Nicosia, the last divided capital city. And then there was a solo show in Victoria, BC, where I live. And the third thing was an artist in residency at the Arts Council of Princeton. So what's sort of significant about all three of those things relative to mental health is that they all involved working with other people. So an artist in residency is community engagement. A solo show is to share your work with an audience. And the peace building conference was to get on a plane and go somewhere I'd never been before and work with people. So all three of those things happened, and I started down this path. And Tiny Pricks Project, so this was in 2015, 16. Tiny Pricks Project, such as it is, didn't really start until 2018. And what I had established up to that point was a stitching practice using thread and text and textile, and engaging with groups, engaging with other people. So instead of my own, a solitary studio practice, I was working with groups of people in which they were also participating. So using a art therapy model of creating parallel to someone, not a hierarchical or a solitary model. And Tiny Pricks Project did come out of those things, because of course whatever you do is just a step in a much longer path. So what really created Tiny Pricks Project, and again, this seems to be a theme we're having today, between a sprained ankle and depression, and then the first Trump presidency for me, which was both depressing and a break of sorts. So out of that presidency came, the first one, a confusion. So confusion and chaos, and a lot of people were trying to figure out what was happening. And so I opened up my practice to the general community on social media. And that was really what started Tiny Perks Project. And it became a project because we were all doing something together. There was something to be done. We were working on something. So first it was Tiny Pricks, and then I collaborated with Lingua Franca, and Rochelle said, it needs to be a project. It is a project. So we had a project to do together, and that really changed my work sort of forever.
That's amazing. And one thing I really love is there's been so many different types of responses to the political environment over the past decade. Are we at now? Um,
Yeah.
Almost decade. Wow.
Yes.
And you took something and helped, it sounds like, cope and process, but also create these conversations with other
Mm-hmm.
people. I know whenever your page comes up on my feed, there was one, there was like people greater than guns. And I see that all the time on my page. But when I saw yours, because there was this like handmade touch to it, because it felt so personal, like you could see the time and the effort and the energy, it just felt deeper. Like those words
Mm-hmm.
matter so much to me, but they really, really like hit me deeper when I saw it in that way. So it's like you found a way to kind of process and cope. And I think on as the ones who are receiving that content, at least I can speak on my behalf again, is it just makes it feel more powerful and really opens the door for other people to process, to create conversations, to hopefully spark some kind of way to build community, to hopefully make some kind of purposeful action.
I think the really big difference when you see something stitched or painted or drawn or whatever it is you think your first thought, whether it's conscious or subconscious, is someone made that. And you start with a person. You start with someone, as opposed to looking at something where you don't think about a person making it. When you see stitching, it feels very humble. It feels very everyday. It's a material that you can work with. And that's what we're doing, is sort of working with what's at hand.
I love that so much. Okay, so for those who are listening, who maybe they're going through a darker time, they're really struggling, and they don't know if maybe they can find that creativity, if they can feel productive at all, maybe. How can people begin to maybe build creative practices, whether it's stitching, whether it's coloring or some other kind of creative? How can people maybe start?
Well, I would separate creativity from productivity. So I
That's
think just sort of
hey.
start to tidy it up. Um, a lot of my creative work starts with what do I miss?
I like
So um, a lot of creativity is a yearning, and so the entire Tiny Pricks project during the Trump era was about what I missed. I was missing some aspects of the time before. Now, the time before may not have been perfect, but I was missing that. And so I think trying to reach for the emotion as opposed to productivity or creativity is some as a practice is to think about how you feel and what you're feeling, and that will create an opportunity for you to um, it's like a vessel, and you want to put something in it. So if you're missing is someone, or for example, you might listen to a song that you listen to together. If you're have a longing for a certain writer, you might pick their book up out of the shelf. If you feel like you're missing something, a time that you spent in nature, you might then go out for a walk. We're it's moving from A to B, and what I've found is sort of moving from A to B is wanting to be in another place. And I don't mean sort of physically, I mean emotionally. So, and it comes from some kind of, for me, and this is just for me, some kind of absence. That whether that absence is a sense of optimism or possibility or hope, um, that the creativity comes from being right, the fulcrum of being between these 2 points of sort of, because if you didn't have it, then you wouldn't miss it, then you wouldn't, for me, this is again, for me, everyone is different, but a yearning is sort of part of what I think creativity creates. So, over your left shoulder is a cover of a book, and it has a kind of illustration on it. And that illustration will be a yearning for something. It will be a feeling that someone who created it had and wanted to put that feeling down. And so I think identifying, feelings, and I don't even necessarily use the word practice, though I understand the importance of it. But my dad was a lawyer, and he had a law practice, and he just thought that was very funny that you were always practicing. you know, um, you know, Doctors have practices. I don't know if plumbers and carpenters have practices, but it's just this idea that, you know, we're always, of course, you're always practicing. So I think it's really about practice. For me, is also about accessibility and awareness. So what materials do you keep at hand? What makes it easy for you? Because the thing about a practice is that it's motivational. It suggests a routine and a connection and a continuity. a rigor and a kind of seriousness, a habit. We could say that eating is a practice, exercising is a practice, sleeping is a practice. What are you doing over, what are you doing sort of consistently? And that has to do with prioritizing it. That has to do with saying, I value this, making, drawing, whatever you're doing, felting, beading. I can't, the possibilities are endless. I value this, and I value this time that I'm going to spend doing this. And that's, I think, sort of the key to it. So those are the two things for me. The what am I missing? This is, I don't know why. I don't know why I start with that. It's just sort of that has always been a very good prompt for me, because it's always something. It's someone or something, because I have loved so many things and people, and so that is always a reliable place to start. Yesterday I was missing Leonard Cohen. Well, what am I going to do about that? It was his birthday, and you already made a reference to, there's the idea of a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. So it's just part of who we are.
Yeah. Oh, I love that prompt. And I think for me, that's something I've really strayed away from over the years. And that's how my work started. So listening to you say that, I mean, in the beginning, I said creativity, productivity. I merged them into one and started focusing so much on the outcome. And I've lost what made it feel so personal to me, what made me feel so happy doing it, which is probably why everything feels so overwhelming all the time. Something that felt fun and made me feel closer to myself turned into something that became about the impact to others and never about myself anymore. When I started the encouragement cards, for example, that was me making cards for myself, craving these messages of encouragement, of hope that I wasn't really receiving at that time. And then I started sharing it to others. But over time, it became so much about others, which is great because I love the project. But it became so much into how can I be productive? How can I produce enough that I lost what it meant to me, which helped me cope and process and move through the depressive episodes instead of almost, I don't want to say that they cause it or amplify it, but creating this extra level of stress that I've created, this extra level of stress that maybe fuels more of the depression instead of coping. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
Well, you're making a lot of sense. And so you're doing a couple of things, right? Of course, because behind you are the, we would say, the kind of visual archive of the work that you do. Books, lanyards, badges. This is, and part of the, like, I don't like this term grown-up world, but part of the professional world is you take something, whatever your work is, and you've got to put it in a bottle, and you've got to sell it and package it and share it, and you want to. But that is not the creative part. That is not, that is something different. And you're absolutely right that it goes, it's all circular. It's all very, um, it's all of one piece. And part of, I think, for me, part of what I don't yearn for the first days when I was stitching and I had no followers and I had no kind of quote unquote work. I was just doing it, and I knew exactly, I just was doing it. I knew what I was doing, and I knew what I liked, and I knew what I wanted to do. And then, of course, the bigger something gets, the more, the snowball effect sort of comes into play, and you're just gaining momentum. And the thing about the momentum is, the bigger the snowball is, the faster it goes down the hill. The more it picks up. Like, it's all of a piece, and part of, but then you're right. The secret to the practice is being able to step off again and be this tiny handheld snowball again, which is, tricky. And being able to articulate it the way you are, because your work has relevance, and that's important, and that is actually something bigger than you and bigger than me. And I'm always surprised when I get messages from people who have followed the project for years and they tell me what it means to them. And I realize I don't know. I don't think about that because I don't know, but it always makes me feel that the project has and the work has a life of its own, that it's out there doing things and meaning things to people and different things. And that's um, actually kind of liberating in a way. But you're right, you want to return in order to have more to offer, to have more things to you have to not retreat. That's not the right word, but it's hard to create in a very public on your on your feet, so to speak, in a public arena. I think um, you need to, it's stepping forward and backward all the time.
How do you kind of balance that, the stepping forward and stepping back?
Well, because it's a weird thing. I have this barrier, which is a phone. So we can, we can look at phones a lot of different ways. Like they're a portal. So, it's this right now. This is like nothing. Like I don't even know what this is, like a black square. But when I go through it or I go into it, in other words, when I turn it on and when I post, then I'm entering, I'm stepping out into the street, I'm stepping out of my space, and I'm in, in the flow. So I sort of balance it by using it, the device as a device. I mean, as a way to control when I'm public facing and when I'm, then I can put it down and I can create my work. So I'm always, going back and forth between these two spaces. That's because all of my work is posted. That's how I share it. And so it shows me how to balance and how to separate those two things. I suppose we'll get to some point where we won't have this kind of device. Like the sharing will be, I don't know, automatic, and I think then we sort of have I would have a problem, but I probably won't be around for that. But there's this way in which um, using the the formats that we have available to us for our work and for our creativity can help us um, help us sort of stick to what really started our work, where we start, knowing where you start and with what, because we're also simultaneously always storytelling. So what is your story? And when you go back to where your story started, you can also go back to that kind of space. And my story didn't start, I wasn't immediately on my phone posting on social media. I was going through my deceased grandparents' textiles and thinking, what should I do with these? I can't throw them out, but I can't keep them. I had a problem to solve. So sometimes we can go back in that way and recreate or be back in a space that was very creative for us.
I like that a lot. It's like setting boundaries, right, with technology, with the way that we're interacting with others and the way that we're focusing maybe on the outcome instead of the process, but then also going back into ourselves and where it started, where that spark, that joy came to be. Because even when you love what you do, I mean, I can speak for myself, it can still feel like a lot when we're so focused on that outcome, on what other people are receiving instead of never going back into this is what it means to me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and the expression you were just using, to speak for yourself, because you're doing both in your work now. You're speaking for yourself, and then you're sort of speaking for there's the word practice, but you're speaking for a thought, a theory, a practice, an instructional, motivational sort of part of your life. And the creative part is when we speak for ourselves. But of course, as you know, when we speak for ourselves, we are often speaking for many other people, because we're not alone in our experiences. So speaking for ourselves can be speaking for with and for and about, and real active optimism.
Diana, you have been absolutely amazing and really helped me reframe so much about that. I think for me, a biggest takeaway was that creativity and productivity and learning to separate it and coming back into myself. So thank you for that, because it's something I really needed in this moment. For those listening, how can they learn more about you, Tiny Pricks Project, connect with you?
Yeah, well, Instagram at Tiny Pricks Project is sort of where I post daily, and I look at messages. I have a book out called Crafting a Better World, which is really a community. So if you want to know more about me, this is a way of knowing about the people who've inspired me over the decades. The people, when I was starting my creative practice, I thought, if only I could meet Myra Coleman, if only I could do this, if only I could do that. So the book is a bit of a dream come true. And there are over 20 contributors who all offer just a snapshot of what has kept them going creatively, and how creativity and a hope for a better world, both for themselves, for their children, for their neighbors, for their community, for their countries, has inspired them. Yeah, those are very easy ways to reach me and learn more about what I have been doing for the last decade.
Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation, focusing on normalizing the conversation, bringing education and awareness to the forefront, and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation, and visit our website inspiringmygeneration.org to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.